Okay, let's go. Hi, okay, Blake, we're gonna start. I'm Michael Makovsky. I'm the president and CEO of JINSA. Welcome, everybody, for a special edition of our weekly webinar on the war going on in the Middle East. We're joined a little bit of an expanded cast today, a little bit. We'll start with General Amikam Norkin, previous commander of the Israeli Air Force and a JINSA Distinguished Fellow. We also have General Yaacov Ayish, who's a Josephson Senior Vice President of JINSA and the former head of IDF operations. And we also have John Hanna, the WACS Senior Fellow here at JINSA. Let's get right at it, and I'm going to start with General Norkin, the previous Air Force commander. So obviously what we're going to discuss is what happened in the last couple days, particularly yesterday early morning, Israeli time or Mideast time, the exchange between Israel and Hezbollah. Obviously, this is ever since Israel killed the chief of staff, the Hezbollah chief of staff, the number 2 at Hezbollah, Shukur, a few weeks ago. There's been an expectation of some Hezbollah attack or retaliation of sorts from Hezbollah. And obviously, there's also been some expectation of some Iranian attacks since Haniyeh, who's ostensibly the head of Hamas, was killed in Tehran, and it's widely assumed that it was done by the Israelis. Of course, the Israelis have been mum about that, but they explicitly took responsibility for killing Shukar, and that was done in response to a Hezbollah rocket that went into a northern town that killed a dozen young Israeli children, adolescents, all of whom were Druze, Arabs. General Norkin, let's start with you. Obviously, everyone on the call, and we have a lot of people on this call. We're assuming everyone has been following in the last 36 hours about what's been going on. Maybe you, as the previous Air Force commander of Israel, could add a little color. I'm just going to start with the general question, and then we'll get into some specifics. But why don't you tell us how you see what happened, both what happened on the Israeli side, what has been termed a preemptive attack on Hezbollah sites that Israel claims prevented Hezbollah for what they were about to do, which was to fire all these rockets at Israel. And it's been reported something like 6,000 launchers were knocked out, and there are about 100 Israeli airplanes involved, done in the early morning Mideast time. And then there was some Hezbollah strike back of a couple hundred or so rockets that seem to have done really almost no damage, except maybe kill some chickens, which has been mocked on social media. Of course, there was an Israeli sailor that was killed, I think, from shrapnel from Iron Dome interceptor. But that's just some of the basics that we've been reading about. Maybe you could explain to us, and let me just explain to the audience before you do. The Israeli Air Force is not obviously only in charge of the airplanes, of course, but they're also, it's under the Israeli Air Force's purview is also the air defense batteries. So I think, General Norkin, you're the perfect person to obviously to talk about both sides of what just happened here.
Well, thank you, Mike, and thank you for the opportunity. And as you mentioned, in Israel, there is only one aviation. There is no Army aviation, Navy aviation. There is only the Israeli Air Force as the only aviation. And the Israeli Air Force should support, of course, the IDF missions generally, and especially the South Command missions and the North Command missions. So since October 7, the Israeli Air Force act in a multi-front campaign in Gaza, in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq, Judea and Samaria, and the Red Sea. And as you all remember, almost a month ago, we act also in Yemen, at the Al Khodeidah port. So having said that, as a background, every day in the last 10 months, there is a high alert air power that is staying on ground and waiting for any, let's say, surprises from each of the fronts, especially from the North Front. And especially in the first few months, we thought that Hezbollah might try to send some special forces into the Israeli territory. So the Air Force was prepared to attack those targets since October 7. But in the last 3 weeks, since we did the mission that Mike mentioned in Beirut, and we killed the head of the military part of Hezbollah, the chief of staff, Hezbollah announced that he will respond and he will act against the Israeli territory and Israeli targets. And the Israeli intelligence recognized 2 days ago that Hezbollah is supposed to act against strategic targets inside Israel at the center of the state. And it already published in the media, so I can speak about it. Targets around the city of Tel Aviv. And the media also mentioned Unit A200, which is the main SIGINT unit, intelligence unit of Israel, and other targets around this camp. So once the intelligence recognized that Hezbollah is supposed to act, the IDF and the war cabinet decided to launch this preemptive attack. And it was already planned by the Air Force and the North Command, and the airplanes attack in a very short time. Altogether, launchers, weapon storage, UAV units. At the same time, we defend the airspace, our airspace, against those suicide drones. At the end of the mission, as you know, the Lebanon side declared that they got between 3 to 4 people that were killed in this attack. And by that, we can understand that the IDF choose the targets that they are not inside the urban territories. All the launchers that the IDF, the Air Force, attacked were launchers that were hidden in the open fields inside or between the trees, inside the woods, and not at the basement or between the houses inside the villages or the cities. So there are many other launchers, but the Air Force and the North Command prefer to attack those launchers without killing Lebanon citizens. So by this plan, the Air Force and the North Command reduce the amount of rockets that Hezbollah can launch toward Israel in this morning. At the end of the day, he launched less than 300 rockets, which is almost a regular day in the north border of Israel. But I think that the rockets, they are not the main story. The main story, they are the suicide drones. And I would like to show three pictures from the Israeli media. Blake, if you can share
Yes.
with us those pictures, please.
Yeah. Okay.
So we can see here in the first one, this is one of the Hezbollah suicide drones. They launched those drones from Lebanon, and the drones were the main system that Hezbollah used to for this attack. Very accurate capabilities with a small warhead, and they aimed those drones to those strategic targets that I mentioned in the beginning. The Israeli Air Force got the radar capabilities, the Iron Dome, the F-16, the F-35, and also cooperate with the Israeli Navy, with the Navy capabilities around the Mediterranean. And we intercept all the drones that Hezbollah, 100% from the drones that Hezbollah launched toward the center of Israel. And the next picture, please, we can see in this specific one, the Israeli F-16. You can see here the Israeli F-16 with 3 fuel tanks and 4 air-to-air missiles. And this specific airplane launched one of them. This picture taken from the ground. Next, please. And few seconds later, as you see, the air-to-air missile intercept the drone, and the drone exploded in the skies of the Galil, the north part of Israel, while he is flying toward the center of Israel. So the main story about the suicide drones, which we can recognize in our war and also in Ukraine, every night the Russian launch Iranian drones toward Ukraine. And the drones became the main threat, specifically once the enemy would like to attack a specific target and to use accurate system. So by taking out and intercept all those drones, the Air Force stopped all the, let's say, Hezbollah plans. And none of the targets, the strategic target, had been hit by any drone or any rocket. So they failed, and we defend our nation at the tactical level in this, let's say, 4 or 5 hours. But as you learn from Hezbollah leader Nasrallah's speech, he declared that they launched 300 rockets, and those drones, they crossed the border, the Israeli border, so it's good enough for them. And we already spoke about the difference between the Israeli or the American culture and the Arab, Lebanon, Iranian culture. We are looking for BDA, bomb damage assessment, and they are looking just for, okay, we launch those rockets, we launch those drones, it's good enough for us.
Let me,
Please.
sorry, Norkin, let me jump in for a second, and let me just ask you for a little more granularity on what you said. I think it would help go back a few minutes where you're talking about there was Israeli intelligence And the Air Force, as you said, was been preparing for this, reacted very quickly. How does it work exactly that the intelligence picks up which launchers are going to be directed where, and that they're about to and that the Israelis detect this, and they know which are going to be used to launch some rockets or drones, and that the Air Force is able to react so quickly and knock out those areas? Could you explain that?
Well, as the Israeli Defense Forces spokesman mentioned, we collect intelligence in the last 2 or 3 weeks about the Hezbollah plans. With our intelligence capabilities, UAVs, satellites, and others. Of course, there is a very deep cooperation between the Israeli intelligence and the American intelligence. And the Lebanon territory is, there are some different Hezbollah units in the south of Lebanon. So the intelligence might know which unit is going to launch the rocket and where the launchers are hidden. And by that, the intelligence become targets. And once we know those targets, the Air Force can plan his, let's say, targets, flights, plan, and prepare himself to such an attack.
So I'm going to ask a couple more questions, then I'll move on. We'll come back to all these technical questions, but I think it's important to understand is it's also been reported that, first of all, that capability, what you just discussed, you were Air Force commander for 5 years until 2022, I believe, right? So was this capability, did it exist in 2016? Was this something that developed when you were commander? Is it something that's happened since you were commander, that Israel is able to get this intelligence and the Air Force is able to respond so fast to knock out these launchers before they're able to be utilized?
Yeah. Well, first of all, we developed the Iron Dome. The Iron Dome is the main system that defend Israel. As you know, in the Second Lebanon War, we got no Iron Dome. And the Iron Dome started to become as an operational system since 2011. So, and now the Iron Dome intercept more than 90% from the rockets. And it's unbelievable. Second, once the enemies around us, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Iranian proxies, use as a main asset rockets and missiles, we develop a method, the intelligence and the operational method, how to find those launchers and how to attack and destroy them as soon as possible. But you can never, let's say, destroy until the last one. As you saw last night, the Hamas launched a rocket to Tel Aviv from Khan Yunis. Although we already destroyed all the Hamas military units, so they still have one launcher. So launchers are part of the story. You need to destroy the headquarters, the communication, and other. But in this specific scenario, we choose to attack only the launchers. But if I may add, Mike, let's speak a little bit about the strategy. Because at the tactical level, I think that we achieve what we plan to achieve. At the strategic level, the way that the IDF act is step by step below the level of full-scale war. But every step with a lot of achievements in the last 6-7 months. We destroy a lot of targets, a lot of assets. We killed many high-level commanders at the Hezbollah side. And I think once you put them layer on layer on layer on layer on all those tactical small steps, today we got quite good amount of targets and the tactical level, and all together they have some strategic effect. I'm not sure that we are at the right level now, but we have a better situation than comparing to a month ago.
Okay, let me turn to General Ayish, and we'll come back to General Norkin. Let me ask you, I mean, Israeli Defense Minister Gallant suggested that something like Israel preemptively knocked out something about a half or 2/3 of the rockets, or I guess drones, that Hezbollah was planning to fire. If they fired, let's say 250, if they got those off, and as General Norkin referred to, Iron Dome really intercepted those that needed to be intercepted, does this suggest they were going to fire 500 rockets, 750 rockets and drones? I mean, how do you assess, General Ayish, the preemptive action? Because I think that's kind of the new element in here. Or it seems like one of the new elements here is that Israel decided preemptively destroy some of these launchers to minimize, I guess, also how many interceptors they would have had to use, or how many planes they would have had to use to knock some of these drones and missiles out. So, can't hear you.
Thank you for having me, Mike. I think just before I answer your question, I'd like to
please
shed some light on the strategic context. I'm afraid that we are talking already 20 minutes. We didn't say the word Iran, which is a significant player here. And we didn't mention the fact that we are talking here about allegedly retaliation by Hezbollah, and I would say a limited retaliation by Hezbollah. Now, back to your question. Hezbollah have the ability to launch something like 3,000, 4,000 rockets a day. When I'm saying rockets, I mean all type of rockets, missiles, mortars, and there's some missiles with the heavy warheads and some missiles which are accurate, called PGM. He have those capabilities part of his arsenal. In this case, definitely Hezbollah was aiming to use a very limited portion of his power from a very specific areas, as General Norkin described, for a very specific reason. They wanted a limited retaliation in order to prevent a full-scale war. And this is a big question. This is the elephant in the room that we should maybe address later on. Why? How come? They decided to join this war as a show of solidarity on October 7th. They decided to break the ceasefire between us and them from 2006 for no reason, no escalation that have happened from the Israeli side in October 7th. And we have to ask why they decided to take it to the next level and why in a limited way. And I think the answer is very clear. It's very much connected to Iran. It's very much connected to the risk management that was done in Iran, in Tehran, and done in Beirut after what have happened with Haniyeh by someone, with Shukur, and many other commanders that Hezbollah have lost. Since the beginning of this war, Hezbollah lost 500 operatives. Most of them are tactical commanders, and they are still losing them. Also, a few in the last week. So we have to remember that. Definitely what they prepared for yesterday was limited. The first line of defense for the IDF in this case is its offensive capabilities, as it was translated by the Israeli Air Force to an air offensive. The second line of defense, as we saw it yesterday, is Iron Dome and all the other capabilities that were used.
Okay, I appreciate your point about Iran, and I did want to get to that, but I think it's an important point you make that this was ultimately a limited action. Let me get to John Hanna. You heard John, General Norkin refer to the U.S. intelligence help. Now, there's been conflicting reports I've seen about whether the United States helped or not a little bit. Maybe they help with intelligence, but how do you assess what's happened in light of how do you assess how the United States and the Biden administration and the U.S. military, led by General Killa, the head of CENTCOM, on the ground there, how do you assess U.S. action in the last couple of weeks leading up to this, by the way?
Good. Thank you, Mike. Let me before I answer, let me just make a point, because I think it's important for the audience to hear, because we all saw what happened on October 7th down in Gaza, and everybody, Israelis, Americans, others, acknowledge that was an Israeli failure of the Israeli security establishment military. And it clearly seems to me that it was the fact that that Gaza was just a lower priority for Israel, that Israel thought it had the problem contained, and it just did not devote the necessary assets and thinking and intelligence to understanding fully what was happening in Gaza with Hamas and processing it. If you contrast that now with what we've seen over the last month, which is the real Israel, when it does invest its limited but significant intelligence and military capabilities on a target, it is simply almost without question the best possible ally for the United States in the world. What other country would have been capable of doing what we saw happen in the last month? First, you had the tragic attack on Majal Shams, I think on July 27th. Within 4 days, they are hitting a target in downtown Beirut, in the heart of the Dahya of Hezbollah's headquarters, on a specific floor. They're clearly deep inside the communications network of Hezbollah, and an absolute precise attack carried out by the IDF to kill a guy who was responsible 40 years ago for killing 240 some odd U.S. Marines that we haven't been able to get. Israel got him and conducted an operation within the span of 3 or 4 days to take this guy out. And then within a few hours, they are inside of an Iranian safe house in downtown Tehran, taking out the leader of Hamas, who's under the control of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. And then you saw yesterday's operation, what kind of exquisite intelligence Israel must have had in order to know what Hezbollah was going to do, and then to have that intelligence, to be inside that decision-making loop of our common enemy, and then to conduct this kind of pinpoint, precise, accurate, as General Norkin described it, not killing any civilians, a strike that really did significant damage operationally to defeat this effort by Hezbollah, and yet also achieved Israel's goal of trying to contain this conflict. Again, both in terms of the intelligence and the operational capabilities and professionalism, it's just, I mean, Americans need to understand the value of this ally that we have with us. Whatever our differences and disagreements are, it's hard to put a value on this. If you're an American national security decision maker, with the Middle East being one of your highest priority regions of the world, you're stretched in Ukraine, in Europe, and in East Asia with the Chinese, and yet you've still got to protect your core interests in the Middle East. To have Israel as a partner being able to act against our common adversaries, I think is just priceless. And it's worth remembering, because I don't know any other really of our allies who might have been able to pull off what Israel's pulled off, at least in the last month. With regard to the American role, I've got to say, other than the immediate 24 hours, I thought after Haniyeh was killed and the president came out with some, I thought, unfortunate statements, really implicitly criticizing or even explicitly criticizing the assassination of Haniyeh. I thought very quickly the Americans turned on a dime. And I think with regard to the possibility of Iranian and Hezbollah escalation, which seemed very imminent, if you saw the statements of the supreme leader and Nasrallah, they climbed up a very high tree very quickly, talking about very severe punishment that they were going to inflict, promising something much greater than April 13th and 14th in terms of their attack on Israel. If you saw what both the Israelis were threatening and getting prepared for, if you saw these American deployments, not only of significant capabilities, obviously 2 aircraft carriers now in the region, F-22s, F-35s, a guided missile submarine, which really has no defensive purposes. It's got 150 land attack Tomahawk cruise missiles on it floating close to Iranian Hezbollah waters. It's a very clear message. And then the United States said 2 very important things that it didn't say on April 13th, I don't think. One was that we're going to, again, do everything we can in our power to actually defend Israel and make sure it's defended from these attacks. But then it added an amendment to what they did on April 13th. And they said, if Hezbollah and Iran, if you miscalculate here, if you overreach, United States may or may not attack you, but we're not going to be able to do anything to hold Israel back, and we won't hold Israel back from imposing, and this was attributed to an American official, their message to the Iranians, cataclysmic consequences on Iran. And in that context, I think what General Norkin mentioned, in particular, the operation Israel conducted in Hodeidah in Yemen, that very long-range operation, and the massive damage they did to that port, and a bunch of oil and fossil fuel storage facilities at the Hodeidah port. The implication was clearly we can go reach out that same distance and touch Iran's most vital assets, including its oil terminals on the Gulf, if we have to. And I think that kind of American messaging and the deployments and Israel's capabilities really made life much more complicated for the Iranians and Hezbollah over the last several weeks. They really did have to miscalculate. It doesn't mean we're past the danger point yet. Terrible things can still happen. But I think we've really complicated their decision-making calculus about what exactly they're going to do, because they're on the hook now. They've got to defend their honor for what were major, major humiliations and try and restore some semblance of deterrence. But at the same time, it's obvious, including from yesterday's attack, that they desperately don't want to have to trigger any kind of major escalation and war with Israel and possibly the United States. So for me, my bottom line, this is just of what JINSA has been saying for years. This is just the poster child for what happens when America and Israel have as limited daylight as possible between them when we're facing these very common adversaries of ours. It doesn't mean we can always succeed in deterring them, but the more we're together, the more we complicate and make difficult their decision-making calculus and make them think twice, 3 times, 4 times before deciding on what they're going to do. So I think all of that, the United States, Israel acting together, has had an important impact. Again, it doesn't guarantee that we're going to escape this scot-free, but I do think it really adds real significant value, and it should be a lesson going forward on how we handle these kinds of incidents in the future.
Yeah, let me ask you on that.
Today, the American chairman, General Brown, visited with the Israeli Chod in our North Command. In the Lebanon front, they were there together, and I think it's another message for the region. And although the threat is still there, I think that now we are on the closest situation between the militaries.
Yeah, by the way, I'll remind everybody that in June, I think it was around June 23rd or something like that, U.S. Chairman of Joint Chiefs C.Q. Brown made a statement
Yeah.
that we're not going to, and I wrote about this at the time, and I was in Israel at the time, and that we, the United States, are not going to be, basically, I don't remember, they have the exact quote in front of me, but we, the United States, are not going to be supportive of Israel with Hezbollah, kind of like we did against the Iranian barrage of air attacks in April. But it seemed like actually maybe the United States is not needed in this case, but it does seem to mark a shift. As you point out, General Norkin, that CQ Brown is actually in Israel, meeting with the Northern Commander, showing really, in a very visual way, solidarity with Israel.
Yes, and I think just to be clear, I think that April 13 is much, it's a higher challenge for the military. April 13 was much higher challenge than the preemptive attack that we did 2 days ago. To defend Israel against the 110 ballistic missiles and 300 cruise missiles and drones, it's much more complicated than comparing to the preemptive attack. So the challenges are still in front of us.
I want to go back to General Norkin about some of these issues. I want to just go back to John first, just to follow up about the lesson. You think this is a lesson that U.S. officials understand? And secondarily, it seems like, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but you have General Killa, the CENTCOM commander, who's been really forward-leaning about coming to Israel, help coordinating. He did that in April. He was there right on the eve of the Iranian attack, which I know the Israelis really appreciated. He was there again recently. You had General C.Q. Brown, as General Norkin pointed out, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs was just there. Obviously, Gallant and Secretary of Defense Austin have been in touch very regularly, but it almost, do you think there's, and you have to think that some of the military actions are either all being directed from senior U.S. officials, or maybe some of them are doing this on their own. But I guess, do you see any difference, John, between how the senior civilian leaders in the administration look at the daylight issue that you referred to, and some of the U.S. military leaders, at least Killa in particular?
Yeah, I'm sure that some are better than others, but at the end of the day, listen, we're a military controlled by a civilian government, a very strong civil military control. And if there are major deployments happening around the world, I'm thinking the president through his chain of command at DOD through Secretary Austin, that they're all, sitting around the sit room authorizing those things. So I wouldn't want to pick or choose. I do think General Killa has simply been a superstar in this, and I have no doubt that he has a duty and responsibility to provide his best counsel and advice to the Secretary of Defense and the President and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs on what he thinks needs to be done. And as far as I can tell, his advice has been followed more or less over the last month. Whether or not people in the administration fully realize why what's happened over the last several weeks is so much better than the kind of dissonance that we've had over the past several months in terms of the kind of messaging it sends our common adversaries. that there is no daylight here that they can exploit. I don't know. I haven't talked to them and wouldn't want to speak to them. I hope that they see the difference. I mean, you can see a little bit, I guess it makes you question on the ceasefire talks, which have been handled in a slightly different way, in which the U.S. is taking this position as kind of as much as possible a neutral mediator, being sympathetic to Israel's positions and obviously wanting to get those hostages out. And yet at times you wonder, are we really applying sufficient pressure to the real problem here, which is Sinwar and Hamas, and objecting to the thought that they could apply any conditions or make any demands in terms of what Israel needs to do in protecting its own security posture in Gaza after what happened on October the 7th. And yet we seem to be entertaining some of those demands. But I have a feeling more or less that negotiation and our posture as a mediator there was kept separate from the kind of messages we were sending to the Iranian Hezbollah possible retaliation, including, that announcement of $20 billion of weapons that were going to be released over the next several years. Doesn't have an immediate impact on the battlefield, but it was on top of everything else, just another very important signal to our common enemies that they, as much as they try, they will not be able to divide the United States and Israel. In fact, we're going to double down on the importance of this relationship.
Yeah, let me ask you, General Ayish or General Norkin, whichever of you want to jump in on this. Could you just explain a little bit more about how these launchers were taken out preemptively? Was it artillery? Was it planes? Was it drones? And what roughly, what do you get to understand was the mix of what the Hezbollah was going to fire? General Norkin mentioned in the beginning that it wasn't really the rockets that was the biggest concern, but it was what he's called these suicide drones. So I don't know which of you would like to start on that, but I'll leave it to you. All right, General Norkin, it looks like you're going to.
Well, age before beauty. Ayish, please. You're on mute.
So, first of all, a short comment to what John just said. I think it's really important, and just to reflect on it. In the last week, the airplane that have landed with equipment from the US for Israel in Israel was the 500 one. And this is as an addition to 107 ships that have arrived with equipment and munition to Israel. And the shortage that we have faced a few months ago suddenly pushed aside, and there is a flow in the last few months, and I think it's a genuine reflection to what John described. Now, going back to the north and the preemptive strike, Mike, the context is that the Northern Command and the General Staff is preparing himself for a full-scale war in the north. And they are thinking on full-scale war since day one. Whatever they do in the north, whatever they did in the north, in terms of offense, defense, intelligence, or logistics, they are taking that in consideration. So whatever targets they have chosen yesterday, as General Norkin described, it has few implications. One is to limit the collateral damage, and that's why those targets were chosen. Second is to choose launchers that are about to be used and to remove immediately that threat. And the third, and we are not talking about them too much, is all type of storage places that once you are attacking them, you remove another capability from Hezbollah for the day after. So the broad context is to make sure that you are not escalating the situation to a full-scale war. The second one is to remove the threat. And by that, we are picking up the targets. And the third is to prepare yourself for a full-scale war, which I'm afraid is imminent.
General Norkin, you wanted, now that we did age, you want to do beauty now? Turn to beauty?
there are some questions from the audience, Mike.
No, I know.
Yes, I see here 5 questions. So let me add that first of all, what is the Navy? What was the Navy mission? So as you know, the Navy can do with his radars and Iron Dome. Some of the warships of Israel got Iron Dome, so we can defend our borders also from the western side with the Navy, with let's say to detect those drones and to intercept them with Iron Dome or with other systems, and of course to intercept rockets. And second, from the second question that I might speak about is, I think that the main threat for the strategic targets in this specific scenario were the drones. And this is the reason that we defend our nation with more than one layer, the Iron Dome, the F-16, the F-35, and we intercept more than 20 drones in this mode. As you mentioned, John, I'm not sure that many nations around the globe can intercept at the same time hundreds of rockets and tens of drones. It's a very complicated operational mission in a very short time.
And how does Israel generally knock out the drones? Is it with these planes, as you mentioned earlier, or is it through different other means as well?
Well, the main system is the Iron Dome. We adapt a new technology 4 or 5 years ago, and by that we can intercept with the Iron Dome both rockets and drones. Second, there is some EW capabilities. And third, we can intercept the drones with our combat fleet, the F-16, the F-15, and the F-35. And in a few years, maybe we are going to see some laser capabilities also at the battlefield.
And the attack helicopters.
And of course, yes, the Apache is also part of the operational arsenal.
Okay. Let me ask all of you, all three of you, we have like 10 minutes left. It's gone quickly, at least for me, is what we've just seen, what's just happened. John referred to politically one of the lessons being, look what happens when the U.S. and Israel work so closely together. And it's, but let me ask you all, based on what we just saw, beyond that, key lesson, what do you think what we've seen, what does that portend for going forward? If you're Hezbollah, and it sounds like Nasrallah suggested, okay, he's told his people we were very successful. We fired all these missiles and drones at the Israelis, at their military facilities. It was a big success and so on. But aside from what he's saying to his people, what do you think the lesson is for Nasrallah? And if the Iranians, who we assume had approved this or instructed the Hezbollah to do this, what do you think they're drawing? What lesson are they drawing from all this? I shall start with you, since you're the one who mentioned.
Okay. Thank you, Mike. I think from the lies that we have heard from Hezbollah yesterday, we can understand that they are very embarrassed. Having said that, we have to be very, very careful here. They are embarrassed. It means that they are going to try and find a new way. And by the way, new way could be either from Lebanon, it could be from Syria, it could be from Iraq, it could be from Yemen, it could be abroad towards an Israeli institution such an embassy or something like that, as we have seen in the past. And we have to open our eyes and ears very carefully here, and to understand that it's not the end of the story as it happened yesterday. And in many ways, Iran is in the same situation. The issue is that Iran have much more to lose. After April 13 and 14, they understand their limitation. After the Israeli Air Force attack in Hudaydah, they understand what could be the price, and it was just a demonstration. When you are adding to it the fact that we have demonstrated that we are capable to hit very sensitive targets, very deep in Iran and elsewhere, so I'm sure that they are calculating their next steps carefully. Having said all of it, it's not the end of the story. We have to be very vigilant here, very on alert. Otherwise, they might surprise us, and we had already on October 7th. Last word about that. I think it's very important to mention. Whatever we did yesterday, and the reason why I'm emphasizing that it was limited, it wasn't enough to restore security, to remove totally the threat at the Lebanese border, and to bring the residents of the north back to their villages. And this is still a very heavy, a very strategic, open case that we have to complete. And this is something that we have to invest a lot in order to restore that confidence.
By the way, Ayish, if I may, because you mentioned about a war in the north possibly being imminent, and while it could be, doesn't this suggest, I mean, even the Hezbollah attack was, I guess, relatively limited. The Israeli preemptive action was also somewhat limited. They didn't go after Beirut this time. They stayed, it seemed like, focused on the south. Doesn't it really tell us what we've seen almost for a whole year now, since October 8th, I guess, the day after October 7th? Israel really doesn't want a war right now with Hezbollah and Iran.
I would emphasize the last
if they could help it.
right
if
now.
They could help it.
Right now, exactly. Right now, if there is an alternative, this is a clear, very open, mentioned policy by the Israeli government. So I'm not surprised. The priority right now is given to the south, and the mission have to be finished in the south. Although we are very close to do that. And when I'm saying imminent, it doesn't mean that it should happen tomorrow.
Okay.
But I'm afraid that it's still a threat that we will have to remove this way or another.
No. General Norkin, do you want to, what does it tell you about going forward?
Once we learn from Ayish, and I completely agree, we should understand that in the next few years, the situation in the Middle East is going to be very, let's say, we are going to find ourselves in a high alert. And we're going to find ourselves acting against threats all around. Although we are not going to declare war. And as I already spoke about it in the previous webinars, first step, we need to have a ceasefire and to bring back the hostages. Once we have a ceasefire in the south, we should go deeply to the north, let's say north story, and to try to achieve our strategic goals through a diplomatic procedure, and to push the Hezbollah ground forces north to the Litani River. And I think the conditions to such an decision is become better. And my last thing that I would like to speak about is October 7th. as John mentioned, we failed. We failed. But it's not because of priorities. It's because of decisions. We got all the intelligence, but we took the wrong decisions the day before. And now, once we can compare October 7 to April 13, or October 7 to August 23, we understand that once we are going to take the right decision, we can do it, as John mentioned, in the highest level. And unfortunately, the night before October 7, we did so many mistakes, and we didn't use our capabilities as we should. So this is the tragedy.
Yeah. John, I'm going to give you the last word. You mentioned about the lessons before. Do you have other things that you think, what does this tell you about going forward? Do you think it suggests things might quiet down now for a little bit? Or of course, the Iranians have been very vague about when they might do something, if they're going to do anything. But you know.
Sure, Mike. First of all, I implied it, but I am still quite struck by all of this talk the first week after the Haniyeh strike about bigger than April 13th, a coordinated attack this time, not only Iran, but all of the proxies, deploying the entire ring of fire to overwhelm Israel. And what did we see? At least so far, again, who knows what could happen tomorrow, but at least so far, we saw the Iranians, the Houthis, and others kind of sitting on the sidelines watching Hezbollah undertake a quite limited attack. So I it simply, again, underscores what I think was the impact of what the United States and Israel did together over the last 3 months in complicating Iranian and the axis of resistance decision-making on this. And if I was an American decision maker, facing all of the threats and dangers and risks and uncertainties that remain out there, not only in the South and trying to get Hamas to agree to a reasonable ceasefire, but also then to quiet down the North and avoid a major escalation and war there, and to really put the Iranians on their back foot, I would double down on whatever's in the pipeline, whatever 2,000-pound bombs or other things that haven't been fast forwarded. I would be making announcement after announcement that leaving our adversaries with absolutely no doubt that if you guys aren't going to choose diplomatic solutions to this, we are going to fully empower our ally to do what it needs to do to fully restore its sovereignty and its security on all of its borders. And I would send that message, and particularly clearly to people like the Egyptians, that we have absolutely zero truck with Hamas. We have no sympathy with Hamas. We're perfectly happy to take Egypt's security concerns into consideration, but we're not going to capitulate to Hamas demands, particularly at a time when it's being slowly but surely ground into dust militarily by the IDF. They're not in a position to make demands on which regions Israel will pull out from during the first 6 weeks of a ceasefire. But I just think that would be incredibly salutary to the entire Middle East. We're still very open to diplomatic solutions, but if our enemies and adversaries are not going to take up that outstretched hand of finding a reasonable compromise diplomatically, then our ally is going to have our full and absolute support to do what it needs to do. The final thing, or two final things. One, never forget the Iranian nuclear program. That's lying out there. Everybody needs to remember that. Everybody needs to keep laser focused on that. We need our intel communities to understand, as difficult as it is, in very minute detail, what's going on there. And again, Israeli intelligence is an absolutely critical, essential partner if we're going to get out of the get out of this dilemma without a demonstration bomb going off in the Iranian desert somewhere. The second thing I would say is that throughout these last 10 months, throughout the most recent crisis, I am struck now by the degree to which it has become normal in this era of multi-front threats and wars against Israel, in which all sides now are kind of agreed that not only is the American military going to supply Israel what it needs, but the American military is going to deploy in significant force, have skin in the game, and possibly be willing to put its soldiers into combat to help Israel deal with this threat. It seems that both Israelis and Americans are now expecting this kind of new phase in our relationship to deal with multi-front war. I'm not absolutely sure what to make of it, but I do think it's potentially an important change in the nature of our relationship that we need to think long and hard about how do we reflect that in the formalities of our relationship, which brings me to the issue of JINSA's longstanding idea. Is there room here for formalizing an Israel-American mutual defense treaty that makes absolutely clear to everybody that what now is gradually de facto becoming the norm, in which Israel's doing all the fighting, but in extremis, the United States is prepared to really put skin in this game, and this new era of multi-front wars that threaten Israel's existence with all of these missiles and drones, potentially with an Iranian nuclear capability, that the United States is in lockstep with Israel. And I guess that would be my final word, Mike, that we all need to think long and hard about that important JINSA idea, because I don't think it's becoming less relevant in the world that we're going to be entering over the next 3 to 5 years, in addition to everything we're doing with the Arab states and Abraham Accords and possible normalization with Saudi Arabia and the creation of these regional defense coalitions. But it all happens under the rubric of an American-Israeli partnership and understanding that then all of these other things are empowered through that we want to do regionally.
That's a good last word, John. I appreciate you raising all those points, including the last one. And for the audience, at JINSA's website, see about what JINSA has written many times, starting in 2018, about a mutual defense treaty with Israel. Most recently, we put out something last September, right before October 7th, it turned out. And there seemed to be some discussions at the most senior level, including with Biden and Netanyahu, on a mutual defense treaty. But that was last September during UN week last year, right before October 7th. But I also alerted the audience to look out, as we'll be talking about that a bit more, that issue more in the future. So I want to thank John, Hannah, and General Ayish and General Norkin for joining us today. I want to thank you all for joining us today, and please stay tuned to future JINSA webinars on what's going on in the Middle East, whether it's Gaza or Lebanon or Iran, and obviously other JINSA writings. So thank you very much, and I wish everybody a good and safe week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.